Welcome back to Worth the Effort Woodworking as I kind of return to a series I started many years ago. It was kind of a curriculum I was working up and I started out with a prerequisite, what I called a prerequisite course. I gave you a lot of the foundational knowledge, the terms, the theories, the practices that a lot of woodworkers discuss in videos, but if you don't understand them, that kind of stuff goes over your head. So that prerequisite course was designed to really ramp up your learning curve so you could understand even some of the basic classes that are out there. And I kind of thought of that as like a freshman level course. For a sophomore level course, I started out with a Start Woodworking, and we went through a lot of basics in woodworking. And whether you went wood turning, intarsia, framing, stuff like that, all of those classes worked in that series. Then, as a junior level course, I started a Start Wood Turning series. Now, you didn't have to really do that to jump into this series, but it went through with that kind of idea that it was based on the other stuff. And, I did a video on the tools, the lathe, and then we started out with simple mandrel turning, where a lot of people start out. As an ancillary group, I told y'all I would do a kind of a side hustle style. So if all you have learned is how to use the spindle, rough and gouge, and how to turn a pen, which I did in your Turn Your First Pen video, which is kind of the introduction to mandrel, well, there's a possibility for you to start out a little side hustle making pens for profit that you can sell and build up more tools so you can learn more skills. And the thing is, the processes that we've learned to turn a pen is kind of the foundation for all production woodworking. So it doesn't matter if you want to stick with mandrel turning and maybe do other stuff like kaleidoscopes or, snow cone scoops or whatever like that. You can do it based upon what I hope to show you in this video. It's a method of making your work more profitable. So I hope you enjoyed this as we start down the production woodworking turn and making a little profit with pens. Oh, and in an attempt to become less of a bad YouTuber, if you get anything out of this video, please like and subscribe. And I don't normally put my batch production impulse off buys on my website, but if you'd like, I think I'll put 25 of these pens out there as a little fundraiser for those of y'all that might just want to buy something of mine to compare it to your work, because I know that's kind of enjoyable for me. I like buying spoons that are made by really highly craftsmen, so it's something aspirational. This is, my batch out stuff that isn't very artistic in my mind, but it might be something you can comparison for, and I'll put that money into buying material for my next video. Now this video is going to be, in my art market project series, because we are batch producing stuff. I'm doing it in a way that would make it profitable to actually sell in markets or online, or if you want to be efficient making a lot of gifts for your office or family or something like that, this is going to be the video for you. But it is also timed within my Turning Basics series in people just getting into the turning hobby, because making pens is kind of a gateway into batch production, into making stuff that you can sell to continue on with your hobby, to invest more in your hobby. With that in mind, I need you to know from the get-go that I'm going to be using other tools such as, a bandsaw, a simple benchtop bandsaw will work just fine. I am going to be using, a drill press. I'm going to be using a lot of tools at my lathe, for example, the mandrels and that kind of stuff that are more catered toward batch production. There is nothing I'm going to be doing with these more advanced tools that you couldn't accomplish with the tool set that we currently have in our Turning Basics series. For example, one aspect to being profitable is reducing your cost for your supplies, which means making your own pen blanks, which is what a small bench top like this would be perfect for if you're in a really small shop. And I will demonstrate how to do this because this tool is part of that Turning Basics series. Off camera, I will probably batch out the rest of my turning blanks on my table saw because I have that tool, and that tool is kind of specialized for those straight cut kinds of works. But I wanted to get y'all used to the idea that you don't have to have everything to work this. In my personal opinion, lathes, bandsaws, and drill presses all kind of the holy trinity of power tools you would use. And luckily, they make benchtop versions of all of them, so you can just sit them in the corner of your apartment. But if you're just starting out, you've just got the lathe and the one gouge, the spindle roughing gouge that we've used in the Turning Basics series, you can batch out production work to sell or give away. It just means that you're going to have to spend a little bit more for your materials because you're going to have to buy your turning blanks. And you can buy them anywhere from 25 cents. Most of the time they're about $1. But if you want to do advanced stuff like these acrylic ones are $3 to $5. So you add that into your pen cost. You won't be making as much per pen. But you know, you sell 50 pens, you got enough to buy yourself a bandsaw. Same is true on the drill press. In fact, in the Turning Basics series, I showed you how you could do all the drilling you need for projects like this on the lathe. But if you're doing production work, this is a production machine, and it will make your life a lot easier, and you'll have probably a little bit more opportunities in future projects using a drill press. And drill presses are one of those woodworking tools that have not changed since the 1800s. All we've really done is put motors on it. And in fact, I think the quality of them have gone down in recent years. But you can find them everywhere. You know, a couple $100 and you'll get a really nice one in a garage sale. A few $100 more, you can buy yourself a nice used one, new one. Now, before we get started, I want to briefly touch on some kind of philosophies for batch production, especially in this pen turning market, because I do know a lot of vendors that get into wood turning and they start out making up pens, and I'm not going to say they never progress anywhere else. It's just they deep dive and become really great pen turners. And they're more in for the art side of it. A lot of those guys, they will actually make 1 to 5 pens in their production runs, but they'll take the quality to the deepest level. They'll customize everything. They'll even venture into getting a machine lathe so that they can machine their own kits. I've even seen people that have taken like mouse skeletons, put them in a little epoxy, run the pen up through the mouth of the skeleton, put a black thing on it, so you're actually turning with a little skeleton in your hand. One of the more famous wood pen makers out there, who's actually got an entire company that he named after a style of pen that he kind of made famous, the cactus juice guy. He used to go get a pair of cactuses that had completely rotted, and the skeleton of those things are kind of like a honeycombs, and he would cast those in epoxies and turn pens like that one, and he created really cool effects. Again, a lot of these people can really deep dive in it, and you know, they get home from work, they put their kids to bed, they go out in the garage and they might make 1 pen a night, or do half of one a night, or do a few steps a night, but they're not batching out the same style of pens over and over and over. Now, I say this because that's the kind of pen turner I am. I am not making high dollar pens. I am batching out impulse buys, because that's what pens are for me. I have other high dollar items in my booths, and you know, if somebody's buying a $200-300 bowl, having a $20 pen there, a $15 pen there that looks nice, that's an impulse buy for them. It's an added sale for me. That's the kind of market I do. That's the kind of production work we're going to be talking about here. But if you're just getting into it, maybe that other style, the artistic style, is something that you enjoy more. So you make 100, $200 pens a year. Christmas season comes along, you set up a booth in a few markets, you sell those, you make a lot more money per pen that way, and you can buy some new tools or whatever. I don't know too many people that make their living just at the high dollar pen, unless they're supplying, you know, Macy's or something like that. But hey, to me, the idea of batch production work, it kind of comes down to, and this is going to be really cynical, taking the art out of your design. You come up with a style of pen that you really like. The shapes are just perfect. The sizing is just perfect. Now the idea is to turn those artistic decisions into process, a process that you can repeat over and over and over. And this is kind of a philosophy that most professional furniture makers I know do. They spend huge amounts of time coming up with a very unique, clever design that they can wholly call their own. And then they start making jigs and stuff like that so that they can produce those same designs repeatedly over and over and over, so that maybe they can make a dining room set of chairs, or produce cabinets that can go into a lot of furniture stores or something like that. Or they can create a catalog that they can put on their website so customers can come to them and say, hey, I really like that design. Can you make it in cherry? Well, they have the process there so that they can reproduce it exactly with maybe a few modifications. But the artistic side of it, well, that's done. They've now gotten into process. And in this video, that's kind of what I want to work through with you, is designing the process to make the artistic design you come up with. And I've even done another video out there on bowl turning, where I turned what I called a $20 bowl. And if you watch that video, you will notice that all the bowls I produced were completely different. Different colors, different shapes, all that kind of stuff. But the design elements were the same, and the process to do those, I set up a machine, I did all 30 to 40 bowls in that one setup, then I changed the machine up, I did all 30 bowls with that one setup. So the overall theme of that design came through. The artistic decisions were made before I even started the entire line, and it came down to process. Now, if you return to that idea of the bowls I did, you know, the process was the same, but all those bowls turned out differently, mainly because of the stock I started with. Each one of them was slightly different. And there is the same thing I take with my pens. All the shapes will be the same. All the pen kits will be the same in this particular production run, but there's no reason I can't use cherry, oak, maple, pecan, mesquite, whatever like that, as long as the process is the same with all of them. And for me, it starts out with making my blanks. Just the wood. I don't really care about the species as long as it's appropriate for a pen. I want to start out with the same shapes so that the future steps will work efficiently. Now, obviously, one of the nice things about pens is they really do not require a lot of material. You know, I know a lot of woodworkers kind of hoard little pieces. They set a drawer to make a pen in the future, so they end up with this giant drawer of just junk that they end up trashing eventually. You know, we're always hiding away those little pieces to make cool pens with. But if that's the mentality you're taking, you're more sticking with the artistic, you're building one pen at a time. I can go out in my yard, cut off a branch and make a pen out of that, but I'm starting with a unique piece of stock that way. When I'm batching stuff out, I want uniformity in the stock, and generally it's going to be 3/4 to 7/8 inch squares and maybe 6 inches long, just big enough for the pens. And a lot of times I will make them a little bit bigger because I will backstock it. If I have one board that I find is really cool that I'm going to make a bunch of pens with, well, I will take that one species, I'll make a whole bunch of them, and any blanks that I don't use, I'll stick in a box or something like that for the next production run. So it will give some variety to the batch I'm producing, even though the stock is going to be the same. Because of that mentality, I like to start with boards, consistent boards. I will go buy 6/4 rough stock from a lumber yard. And really, when I'm picking out those boards, I'll pick the stuff that everybody else doesn't want. I have a cherry board right here. Look at it. You got the grain moving all over the place. It's warpy, all that kind of stuff. That doesn't matter. All we're doing is making little 6-inch pieces. So if it warps across a board, who really cares? What I was looking for is this transition between sapwood and heartwood, because I found that that adds a lot of character to the pins. So I went and picked out what is considered a very ugly board for furniture making, but for me as a pin producer, that's going to be great. I also like using white oak, and I will show you why in this a little bit, because one of the processes I can do is to change the characteristic of the wood to darken it, to ebonize it, and we'll play around with that too. But the key thing is, I will start with boards and not just scrap. Now there are a lot of pluses and minuses of using a bandsaw for making your stock. Me personally, I think it's one of the safer tools out there, in that, yes, you can get hurt on this one, but most of the time if you do, you're not losing digits, unlike on a table saw or something like that. Plus the fact that I can use rough stock. That 6/4 material I bought from the lumber yard, well, it hasn't been processed like this cherry board right here, so it's not smooth on the faces, it's not smooth on the sides. It might have warps and twists and stuff like that. That's perfectly fine. There's no reason to pay for that kind of surfacing if you're just going to be turning it off. But if you're wanting to process that style of material on a table saw, well, then you also have to get a jointer, because you have to have at least one perfectly straight edge when you're working on a table saw. Otherwise it can become dangerous. That's not really the case with a bandsaw. You can use that rough stock right from the store. Also, this is a cherry board. I showed you a brand new cherry board that hasn't had time to age, so maybe the sapwood heartwood difference didn't show up to you. But right here, can you imagine that running down the center of a pin? One side clear, one side dark. It makes a great pin, which is why I look for those kinds of variations and what's really more of a boring wood. And while I kind of favor boring wood for my furniture, if you have something really small, you want it to pop. Now this cherry board is about as thin as I want to go whenever I'm doing a wood blank. And you know, it is, 7/8 of an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch is as small as I want to go. I will say that when you buy like these acrylic blanks, they are generally 3/4 of an inch. And that's perfectly fine, because these turn a lot slower. You're going to put a lot more labor into them. But you really don't need much more to make a pin, because you're just turning it off. I just found that having a little bit extra meat on the wood ones, because wood turns so much quicker, is just kind of a nice luxury in case you start getting tear-outs on splits when you first start turning. Plus the fact that I can make more stuff with 7/8 of an inch other than pins in mandrel turning. So I generally, when I'm batching out stock, I generally go for a 3/4 to 1 inch thick material. And because every board I do is a little bit different sometimes, I will resize what I'm doing right here. So I just basically stick it in there and bring the fence over so that there's just enough gap. So I'm going to make basically a square cut. And having it square is important for future steps. Now, one of the downsides of bandsaws are they are a little bit slower than something like a table saw. Upside, they don't have as big a kerf, so you're not going to be removing as much material in the sawdust coming off, so you can get more blanks out of really special pieces of wood. I didn't have a table saw for most of my woodworking career, so I've just gotten dependent upon a bandsaw. So this is the safest way I know to do it, and it's fast enough. Now, when I am cutting blanks, I will generally, make them 2 to 3 feet long, and I will leave them in this space. I'll cut up a whole bunch in my shelf back there. I just have them all stacked up because it's a common size for me. The question is, how long do you want to make them? Now, cutting them perfectly square isn't going to be a big deal, but when you're batching out a bunch of them, you don't want to make them too long because it'll cause you to have to do more work, but you also don't want to make them too short. What I mean by that is this is the pen style that I most commonly do for my low-priced ones. It's a round top streamline, okay? In one blank, I have more than enough to get both the top and bottom, but I can only get one pen out of this blank. And that is the same with most of the store-bought size ones. Most of them are, you know, 3/4 of an inch by 5 inches. That just seems to be the most common size. Mine are closer to 6 inches long. The reason why is in some of the more common other styles, for example, this one right here, which I call a Sierra, I think it's a model name style at one manufacturer, I forget which one. Well, if you buy one pen blank like this and it only requires one piece of wood, well, it's still sized so that you're only going to be able to get one pen out of this entire blank. But if I make it just a little bit bigger, I can now get 2 pens out of one blank when I only require one piece of wood. And I've found that of all the kits I've ever done, you know, the 6-inch size, there aren't very many kits where I couldn't get 2 pens if you're only using one piece of wood. But if you leave your blanks 3 feet long and you know you are making this exact pen model and you're making 50 of them, well, you can make 55 blanks, leaving a 10% margin for screw ups, and then only cut it that much. So out of that 3 foot long section, you'll be able to get more blanks. Plus, you know, if you want to make other things like magic wands or little honey dippers or back scratchers or anything like that, well, you have the full length. If you went ahead and cut all of them up to this size forever, there's only so much you can do. And then you end up having these boxes like I have of random size pen blanks. These are basically all those 10% overs that I didn't end up using. They go in this box. So I have a variety. Now, once I've gotten this far, this is a good stopping point. So if you need to spread it over a couple days, because any step farther than this, we now need to really get organized. So because of that, instead of cutting these into the individual parts for each side of the pen, I will now start processing the pen blanks so that I will know how big to make each section, because you don't want to make them too big because it's just more wood to remove later on. While each pen kit's going to be a little bit different, as in they have different parts and stuff like that, there's going to be a lot of similarities to them. You're just going to have to do a little bit of research with your individual pen kits. But one of the first things I like to do when I'm doing a batch production run is go ahead and separate out all the parts. So you can turn it into a process where you're going to deal with one part at a time throughout. Because some of the parts, like these brass tubes, need a little prep work before you put them into the pen blank. Now the bags that come in are pretty valuable. Hang on to them. They make great little finger gloves for whenever you're applying finishes like CA glues and stuff like that. You can just put the CA glue on here and then kind of rub it on the pen to get your finish. I go through these a lot. And in the old days, you used to get these little mini bags that you could put on one finger, but nowadays you just get the one big bag. Either way, hang on to them. You will use them. Now, something I have learned from experience is that when you're buying the kits, go ahead and buy extra brass, because it's the brass that you're going to mess up. So if you have extra brass in here, you know, you can still make the kits after you screw them up. That is why I end up with extras every now and then in my kits. My main storage box for archives is because I didn't have enough brass to finish up the kits after I might have bent one or ground through it during the sanding process, or maybe the glue up went wrong, or you know, just things happen. But it always seems to be the brass that fails when you're assembling them, so might as well get some extras while you're at it. And you can actually buy generic brass for the 7mm size. They might be a little bit longer, and cut them down, or just make a little bit longer pin in the process. I normally cut them down though. Now, one trick for storing all these little baggies is if you stack them up, don't close them up so air can come out. You can kind of fold them up or roll them up really tight, and, you know, stick 50 bags into one bag, and then you can just pull them out one at a time, kind of like a Kleenex. Just keep a few set aside. You're never going to use them all anyways, so that you can store the individual parts that you're not using so they won't get gummed up, because my little storage thing for the excesses doesn't hold everything. Our main goal right now is just to get all the brass sections separated out, because that's our next step. We've got to scuff up those brasses. You can't skip the step of scuffing up brass. Now, one trick I discovered a long time ago, because so often these two different size tubes, well, they aren't that much different, so it's hard to tell which is which. If you just get some kind of flat reference where you can kind of bring them all together and then let them sit on a side, all of a sudden you can tell which ones are longer and shorter and separate them out like that. Shorts and longs. Now, when you're sorting out the shorts from the longs, this is incredibly important to get right, because if you mess up this step and get some mixed up, the process that you develop, well, it will be affected later on down the road. So you'll have the wrong parts and the wrong pieces. This is the sorting process. One of my most common mistakes is mixing up the shorts and the longs. Now, here's something that's pretty common. They will tell you you have two parts, but really it's only one. What they've done is they've already pre-assembled stuff that you have to disassemble. This particular piece is the top cap, and that's a piece you press into the pen, and they have to be separated so that you can get the clip on anyways. So take this time, go ahead and separate all your parts. So in the end, you end up with all your tail pieces. That includes the piece you press in and the decorative top cap. I keep those all in one bag, simply because they're going to be assembled together. I then have all the nose cones. I have the center decoration. I have the clips. I have the transmissions, and I have the ink blanks. These you can all set aside until the very end, and you'll use them all at the same time when we go through the assembly process. Right now, we need to turn our attention to just brass. Now, you have to scuff up brass. This is a step you cannot skip. If it's not scuffed up, the epoxy, CA, or whatever you use to assemble everything will not work, and eventually it will fail. It might work for you to sell it, but your customer will come back. And you just can't scuff it up in line, okay? I mean, you have to go across that so that the CA has something to grip to, so it won't slide this way and that way. And, you know, if you're doing them one at a time, you know, it just doesn't take too long to hand scuff it up with some coarse sandpaper. I will tell you, this is idiotic if you're in batch production. It will take you way too much time. You've got to automate the system somehow. The best way I've found to do it is with a belt sander. First, most belt sanders have some kind of dust collection, which is always good, especially if you're working with metal dust. Second, and I've had this with several belt sanders, is this back lip is just big enough so that the brass will sit on it. So if you can, the belt is actually coming back this way. So if you can just put enough pressure with your finger back here to get it to spin slightly while it's abrading it, this will do the abrading for you, and it can move fairly quickly. You develop a touch doing this to get it just right. we can now turn back to those wooden blanks. Now earlier, I was kind of talking about developing processes in a production run is kind of the idea of taking away artistic decisions. Well, I had to tell you this, myself, I try to design processes to eliminate all decisions. If I'm having to stop in the middle of a production run and in a step then start making decisions, is the green this way, is the green that way, that kind of stuff, well, that's kind of, it interrupts the flow. And it really does dramatically slow you down because you kind of have, it takes a few minutes to get back in there. And if you're doing these every few minutes, it doesn't seem to work as well for me. So if I can eliminate any kind of decision in the processing, I need to take it. It'll make my work a lot better. And if there is a chance for me to make a mistake in a decision, I'll make it. I'm only human. And even if I only make one error in 100 pens, well, that's money thrown away. So here's one thing I do to eliminate the need to have to think about grain alignment when I'm doing my pens is I'll take a Sharpie and I'll come to the center of all the blanks that I'm going to use that day, and I'll just make a line on one of the corners about 2 inches, not the full length. That is incredibly important, and that will make sense to you how a short line will eliminate decisions in a few minutes. So next I'm going to cut each one of these into the separate pieces for my brass blanks. Now here is an artistic decision, but you're going to make it now and it's going to apply to all of them. A lot of people want to keep grain lined up in pins. A lot of people don't care. If it's wood, it's wood. But me personally, one of the reasons why I like using really wild grain stuff is because you get those lines up there. And I want those lines to line up when people are holding the pin. I think it adds to the value of the pin, adds to the idea of craftsmanship if the grain is visibly lined up. And that's one of the reasons why I mark just the center of these pins, so that when I'm drilling a hole, I'm not going to drill a hole just randomly. I'm going to drill a hole from the center of the pin out towards the end, so I know that the hole will be in the same spot on both of those, and that'll make more sense later on. But whenever I assemble this particular pin, well, it has a centerpiece, and that has a specific amount of space that divides the grain up. And here's the artistic decision you have to make. Do you want the grain to end here and start here, or do you want the grain to flow through that center piece? Me personally, I find it flowing through the center piece from here to over there looks more natural, which is something I like. If it terminates at one level and starts up at the other level, I can notice that one, and what I find is customers are always kind of thinking they got it lined up, but not quite because it's just different. So it'd be like this black line right here, kind of coming at an angle and not having a gap for there to flow through, if that's making sense to you. So whenever I cut my blanks, because these are different lengths, I want to cut it so that I will end up with the brass being about that far apart after I glue it together. So that's what I'm thinking whenever I'm splitting these pieces up, is A, to get each one of those pieces to their specific length, one's a little bit longer than the other, and then give myself enough room so that I can have that centerpiece where the wood will flow from one end to the other, which in this particular example will mean I have that much extra wood on my blanks. So what I would typically do is I would take the longer of the two pieces and I will set that a few millimeters away from the blade, and then I'll bring my fence up so it touches it. And that will give me, that'll make that particular blank, an 1/8 of an inch too long on both sides for that long one, and obviously much longer than the short one. And then I will square up one end, cut it to that length, and then cut it again to the second length. Now I stopped and turned all this off just so I could talk to y'all, because immediately after each and every time I would take those two pieces and I will tape them back together. Because if you don't, they will become separated, they will become lost, and you don't want to waste time. Plus the fact, if you ever want to do a demo or stuff like that, it's just nice having all your blanks taped together. So this now goes on a stack. Now next up, we've got to drill all the holes in all these blanks that we just split up. Now why did we split them up? Well, for most of us in our kind of price range of tools we're working with, we just don't have the drill bits that can actually go all the way through a 6-inch blank. Much less, I hate to say it, the skill to make sure that it stays centered all the way through. And even some of our drill presses, most of the ones you buy that are benchtop, they're only going to have like a 1 3/4, maybe a 2-inch throw. I'll talk about the drill press I bought specifically for pin presses, because I looked for one that had enough throw, enough travel to get through just half of one of my most common blanks. Now, if you don't have a drill press or anything like that, and you are starting out and saving up money, there is no reason you can't drill all the holes for all your blanks with the lathe you've bought. Just get some smaller jaws that will actually fit your blank, divide them up. You're going to want a Jacob's chuck eventually. That'll slide into your tailstock, and then you can just drill through. I did that for years, probably turned my first 1,000 pins that way, just because I was working in the apartment, didn't have the money or space for a nice drill press. The downside to that is it's hard to get truly accurate grain lineup coming through. It just always seems to be off a little bit. Something's always a little bit different no matter how you do it. And if you're in production work, it's just not very fast at all. The quicker way, obviously, is a drill press, which I showed in a previous video on making pins. My previous drill press was an inexpensive Craftsman one. You can find them all over the place in garage sales for 25, 50 bucks, that kind of stuff. It just didn't have that big of a throw, which means I couldn't get the drill bit to go all the way through these blanks right here. What would happen is it would only go halfway through. Now the way I got around that was that in the clamp that I use, I would drill in a little bit as far as it would go, and then if I release pressure on the clamp a little bit, the bit would come up. As I raised it up, I could clamp it back down and then go through the rest of the way. It worked just fine that way, just took extra steps, and sometimes it might waller out the hole a little bit bigger, but it worked. And I did that. That's how I've been doing pins ever since. Now, one of the first production upgrades you should get is some kind of clamping jig like this. They aren't that much money, and it'll last you the lifetime of your turning skills. You'll be able to sell it, get your money back, that kind of stuff. But it makes accuracy and repeatability so much better. And what it is you put a long dowel or something like that in your drill bit, and you clamp this down on that dowel, and that centers it here, and then you clamp this down either through screw bolts or something like that to your platform. And that way this stays solid, and as you can see, the clamp kind of compresses down on it, and that makes sure that your blank is aligned. One of the key things is, you'll notice I put a little Sharpie mark right there. You want to put that black line in a consistent corner every single time. Remember, we split these. So if I were to drill one hole and it was slightly off here, or it was angled a little bit, maybe our platforms aren't perfect, well, if I put the second one in and the black line that I had drawn, I put maybe this way right here, well, those 2 points will not be in the same spot. And you always want to drill from the center out, not this way in, because we're trying to get the hole to line up on both sides. So if you put them both with your black lines in the same position, you know the entry hole will be exactly the same. The exit hole might be off a little bit, depending upon how all your alignment is, but that's not really that important. We want to make sure the entry hole is exactly the same on both of them. Now, in the interest of kind of providing solutions for people just starting out that might be in a very small shop, one of the downsides of drill presses, even the one I had, which is technically a bench top, but really it's a floor standing unit that they just cut it off a little bit short. So it became a bench top, but it's not really. Is they take up a lot of space and they aren't that portable. You can't just move them around your shop to get them out of your way. And when I first started out, I was doing this on the porch of an apartment and the corner of an apartment, that kind of stuff. So I didn't have a lot of space. Rockler came out with a really nice, you attach your regular drill to it. This is not a cheaper option. They have a lot of competitors out there, and I've not really been that happy with a lot of them. I think they're kind of chintzy. This one, it just seems pretty solid built. I spent my own money on this one. I went to the store and bought it. But one of the reasons why I went ahead and made that investment this time is because they also have a clamp that works with it, specifically designed to hold stuff on in, which is exactly what we're doing with our pins. So basically I bought two tools. I bought the drill press and I bought the clamp. And both of these added up to about what you would pay for a small brand new benchtop nice drill press. The thing about it is it's portable. So I'll be able to use this on some projects I have coming up, just a drill press. But this piece right here is pretty much dedicated to pin turning for me. And how it works is you can come over here. I need to go ahead and make my Sharpie mark to tell me that this is where the Sharpies go. And the reason why we did not put the line all the way to the end is that way we can tell that this is the part we divided off. So to do this, I can just drop it in and clamp it down. One thing I do like about the other model is they had a little bar clamp, which is quicker, but I imagine that once you get set up for the production run you're doing, it's just a half twist. You can remove one and put the other in. We then need to put in our 7mm bit. If you're starting out, a lot of the pin kits out there, both pins and other items, are based off the 7mm platform. And what they're talking about is a 7mm drill bit you use to drill the hole for the casing. Warning, not all 7mm drill bits are true 7mm. Some of them are imperial variations and stuff like that. So get yourself a dedicated pin turning drill bit that is exactly the right size. So some things I'm liking about this setup so far is I don't have to push this all the way down. I can actually kind of set it up a little bit high, so I'm not going to be drilling into whatever's underneath the drill bit. Plus I have enough travel with this to go all the way into the board and use up the whole drill bit, which will get me through my blank. So now it's just a matter of attaching my drill bit press and having at it. Moving the old one out of the way, lining up my black line, rinse and repeat. Now when you're done, you still want to maintain them together. But instead of taping it now, an easy way to do it is I buy these little green things from the flower department and just bamboo skewers. They're $100 for $1 at my grocery store. Stab it down, then just kind of drop them on. And not only does this keep each blank together, but it will keep them in alignment for assembly purposes later on down the road after you've turned them. You just end up with this thing stabbed all up with a bunch of these on there. It works pretty fine. You can buy these for about $7, $8 at most Hobby Lobbies and that kind of stuff. Now, I gotta admit that, after doing, about 50 of those, I decided to try back to my drill press, and I do find that the drill press, it's just a little bit easier. You're not having to bend over and stuff like that. So there's a place for both, I think, but I do like having a drill press. Next up, we got to put in the brass tubes into all these blanks. And to do that one, I use CA glue. I know some people use epoxy. I just like a CA glue. And the type I use is what they call a medium thick, though I cut mine down with a little medium thin just because I think the thick's too thick and the thin's too thin. I'll explain that in a second. So this is one of those times where we are taking our artistic decisions and making processes around it so we can duplicate it. Remember me talking about me wanting the grain to line up all the way around. Well, some of the times things are at angle and I want it to flow. I don't want it to stagger across there. Kind of like that one right there. So what we need to do is I've got this right here. I've got my black, well, obviously the grain's lined up on this one. So what I want to do is I want to take away, that right there is about the width of the band saw. And I want to take away this much material on either one of them. So you can kind of look at that. It's going to be a millimeter or so beneath the face to get that distance off. So I'm going to focus on always putting the brass in on the inside and getting that little bit of space. So making sure I had the black line, I grab myself the two different brasses, go ahead and put them out. And then one of them, I will kind of hook it on the end. And I'm going to use my medium CA. And the reason why I use this one is because if you'll notice, it will kind of stick on the top and doesn't really flow off the edge that much. And I'm getting just enough so that as I can rotate it in, it kind of forms a little glob on the edge, and it will fully coat the brass as I come through it. That's good. That's the whole idea, is to get it in there, not take up any gap. And when I get it close, I'll start tapping it, and I'll tap it down so that it is just under the edge, the distance I want. That's perfect. I don't care about this side. This side I got a lot of space. I just want to make sure I get just under a few millimeters under that edge right there. Then I will set them aside because I can't put them back on those spikes until the glue fully dries. Once again, my line's on this side, so I'm going to enter here, put a little bit of glue on it. Not too much. Some people tell me I don't put enough, but I think that's okay. And then I'll twist it in so that I coat all the way around on the brass. Get it close to the edge, then tap it down the rest of the way. Light taps is all it takes. There we go. Then I'll set them down for a few minutes, just somewhat keep them organized. You don't want to bump your table or anything. And in about 10 minutes, after I do about 10 of those, I'll put them back on the sticks. I just don't want to put them on the sticks until that CA has a time to set. Next, we come to the step that pretty much drove me away from batch producing pens anymore. I mean, probably 5 years ago, after my selling thousands and thousands of pens, I just came to the point where I hated it so much, mainly for this next step, because we now have to trim the blanks to the barrels. And it's not a hard process, and the process itself is quick and stuff like that. It's the tools you do that step for that frustrated me so much. Let me explain. Now, barrel trimming involves basically taking the wood down to the brass, because you have to squeeze these in between your mandrel when you want to turn them, so it actually has to connect the brass. So before we can actually put it on the lathe, the mandrel, we have to get rid of this wood, and you have to do it in a very specific way in that it is completely 90 degrees to the barrel. If you don't, the joinery with the hardware kits, they just won't fit right. There'll be little air gaps there, that kind of stuff. And it's this joint which caused me a lot of problems with alternatives to the main way people do this. which is with a pen barrel trimmer, which is this tool right here. So a pin mill kit basically consists of two parts. You have a cutting edge on the shaft, and these you can buy different size versions for different size pin blanks. All the ones we're doing are 7mm, which are most common ones. So you use a 7mm one, and it's actually sized to go inside that 7mm, and that cutting section will clear off any glue or epoxy or CA that got inside the barrel when you were assembling it. So that's what that one's designed to do, is clean out the barrel. And then you have this mill right here, which is designed to flush the end of the wood up with the barrel. And this is a part that I hate the most, because you'll notice the cutting edge is at 90 degrees. This is not slicing the wood, it's actually scraping it. And what's worse, it's scraping the end grain. So can any of y'all hand tool woodworkers figure out why I hate this? It dulls so fast. You're constantly having to sharpen these, especially if you use woods like I do, like the hard oaks, hard maples, bodart, certain pecans, that kind of stuff, hickory. All the native woods in Texas are just so hard that maintaining this thing at a sharp enough effectiveness is next to impossible. So out of 100 pins, I might have to stop and sharpen this thing 3 or 4 times. I hated it because of that. Now some of you are saying, Sean, there's other ways to do it. Yes, there are. Let me show you 2 that I tried and explain to you why I didn't really like them for production work. One of them was just sanding away the wood until it was flush with the brass. One of my main reasons for buying this tool right here was for milling these pen blanks. But what I found was, remember me talking about it being incredibly important to get it perfectly perpendicular to that barrel, otherwise you got a gap. Well, this wasn't the most accurate, because this platform, every time you use it, you had to kind of adjust it like half a degree or 2 up and down. I was using blue tape shims, that kind of stuff. And then you have to get this angle right, which they have a little setup thing right there, but it had a lot of slop to it. So invariably, every single pin was slightly different, and you could tell it when you actually finished your pin and assembled it, because you could feel it. It wasn't a pleasant feeling. So this failed because of the accuracy. But I have a lathe. Why can't I just use a lathe? A lathe has ways, and by design, they are perfectly parallel with the way it would be turning right here. So all I had to do is build a little platform up. I could actually have it sit in these ways, so it would just lock in there. I wouldn't even have to clamp it down, and then just put a fence on that one, because this would lock it down to get it perfectly thing. And then, using a faceplate, make a sanding disc, and this would work great. In fact, it did work great. In the first production run, I was really impressed with myself for using a disc plate, spending all that time building this. I could just come over here, sand away all the wood that needed to go away. Then I assembled the finished pins. The thing about sanding is it's abrading the wood, which means it's creating little channels all the way around, unless you go really, really fine grit, which then just heats up and you get burns. What happened was I could always feel this joint right here is one of the most critical ones in a pen, because people's fingers are always on that section right there. So if there's anything error right here, they're going to feel it. Well, if that surface was slightly rough because of the sandpaper's abrasions, a little microscopic kind of scratches there all the way through, not only would it absorb oil finishes, so it would be a different color, a little darker color there, but it might swell up with fingers, finger sweat, that kind of stuff. So you would feel it. It did not feel good. One of the reasons why I like this pen kit right here is because the center section, where they interact with each other is rounded. So the center section on these pens aren't that critical. And I've always found that the top section, because it's slightly rounded, as long as I get that round there, even if it doesn't match up perfectly, you can't really feel it. But there's nothing you can do other than be perfect on this front section. And sanding, the results were not there. So I kind of just resolved that the only way to get the results I need for the caliper of product I wanted to put out there is it had to be cut. It had to be sliced, and having a good scraper with a slight burr or something like that would get those results. When I was using that end mill, when it was sharp, my results were great. When it slightly dulled, it started fraying stuff, and I would get the results like when I sanded it. Which I hate sharpening that end mill. It takes so much time. You can screw them up so easily. And I got really frustrated, and about 5 years ago, I just decided I'm giving up selling pins at my market just because I'll let the new wood turners do it. Give them a way into the markets. But for y'all, I sacrificed. And one other reason was there's a new solution out on the market. And Woodpecker has an example, and I contacted them to see if they would send me one. I did not pay for this. They sent it to me. But take a look. Dum, dum, dum. Oh. Look at that right there. I actually only asked them to send me the one for the 7mm one, but they sent me the second kit. So they have a kit that offers you all these different sizes for different size pins. It too comes in 2 parts. But look at the end mill itself. What is so cool about this? It uses those standard carbide cutters. And even if these weren't more durable than stainless steel, so they'll last 10, 15 times as long before they dull out. And even if it wasn't that I had four sides, so I wouldn't have to, before I had to sharpen it, I can sharpen this a lot easier than I could that other end mill. I just take that off, put it flat on a diamond wheel, and do that for about 10 minutes to sharpen the edges, and then I got 4 more edges, or I could just buy another cheap insert right there. And this one has these 2 inserts on either side. So forgetting the fact that it will maintain sharpness longer, I like the fact that sharpening this would be easier. I'm actually kind of excited about that one. So let's try this example for a production tool out. And this again is something that, you could buy those cheap end mills and do 100 pens and then spend that money on upgrading to tools like this. So most all pen mills, they are designed to go into just a standard, Jacob's chuck style setup. So you could do it on a drill press or you can do it on the lathe. This time I'm going to do it on the lathe. This is the same thing that used to happen with my old pen mill. This is another one I had, in that the shaft is longer than my pen blank. So you'll see that the cutting edge comes through. So you're going to want to grab some kind of just a piece of board or block so that you can put a little pressure here without worrying about your hand also getting a hole in it. You never want to press with your hand here. So what we're going to do is I have my little brass thing right here. This is the interior end, so it's not progressed deep very far. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of hold in my hand and I'll kind of thread it on there and let that end section really clean out that interior. Not too much because you don't want to make that brass bigger. Then using my push block and this to stabilize it, I'll just push forward a little bit. And I keep checking it, and whenever I see the brass shiny there, I've gone far enough. See, there we go. Got a little shine right there, and the progression is about half of that middle piece right there. Oh, this kind of brings another point. Brass is generally going to be harder than a lot of the wood you have. So right now, this is dead flush with the wood. But whenever I was using these kinds right here, well, obviously they would dull a little bit more towards the center because of the brass. So what would happen is after time, the brass wouldn't be flush. Now, if it was just barely feelable, that's okay because you'll kind of crush it a little bit whenever you're assembling it. But if you can really feel it, you got to not only sharpen these down, but you got to grind it back a little bit so that the blade is straight all the way across. little bit more. There we go. Shiny on both ends. Now, I'm sure some of y'all out there are cringing as you watch me do this one because, you know, my hand's so close to the blade. But this hand is not moving back and forth. Its only focus is holding it steady. This is the hand that's providing propulsion, so I feel safe doing it. But if you don't, that's fine. I'm sure you can figure out some way to hold this steady. I mean, worst case scenario, just go get a quick clamp and you can put it in that. It's easy peasy. I just don't feel as in control doing it that way. Voila. Pens hate me. They really are my arch nemesis in this kind of turning craft art market world. And you want to know something? I hate them right back. There's a reason why I learned to type. But they make money. It's been a year since I abandoned this, and kind of shows the importance of organization because I can just kind of come right back to it with this little flower stand and these skewers. Because I got mad. And I don't mean a little mad. I mean really, really mad. As I said earlier, it's that one step, this truing up the blanks. Now, I need to qualify this. I learned early in my content creation career that I don't want to film myself after I've practiced or after I've done a production run. I don't want to do a production run of pens and then film myself making a pen at the very end because it's very unrelatable. The speeds you quickly get to in a production run, people just don't follow that on YouTube. So I really do like to do my very first time kind of cold getting back into stuff because I'm a little bit clumsier. I'm not as fast. I'm not as confident. I'm kind of reacclimating to the muscle memory, that kind of stuff. And an excellent example of that one was I did a couple of dovetail videos a few years ago where I literally filmed my first dovetails in about 6 or 8 months. I had just gone through a spat where I was doing a lot of wood turning. I wasn't making cabinet making. So I did two videos, one on how to do a fast dovetail and one how to do a fine dovetail. And those were the first ones I've done. And I think they filmed well because I wasn't as confident in comparison to, I did a saw sharpening video where after I sharpened up a dovetailing saw, I cut a dovetail to show how sharp it was. And you know, filming front to end without really any too many cuts, that was a dovetail I did it in under 3 minutes without trying because I had just come off of a couple weeks of cutting lots of drawers. So it just wasn't, it's not relatable when I've gotten up to production speed. So you actually saw the very first times I used this in mill. And they worked. They were a little bit clumsy. They weren't as perfect as I've done in the past, but I kind of appreciate that as a content creator. What you didn't see was the next 20 or 30 blanks I totally destroyed. Luckily, I found some from around the shop where I tossed them and threw on here so I can show you an example. Here's one. This one has this kind of star pattern coming onto it. Oh, can you see that? It's where the end mill started creating a cadence that just kind of kind of like we use chatter work in turning, where it created this unevenness, so that would never work in a pen. And then quite often, they were just literally exploding on me, separating it out. And I couldn't explain why. And a good third of the blanks that I had set aside to do this project are now kaput. Now, some of y'all that were watching the example of how I showed people I do the end mill using my little pressure cup and all that kind of stuff, besides calling me out to the safety police, were saying, understand what was going on wrong if you've used this tool before. I didn't. And I actually called Woodpecker and talked to a nice, very nice lady, and one of the best customer service reps I've come across in a long time. She didn't quite understand either. She took my number and she said she would call me back after talking with a specialist. Well, she wasn't able to get to a specialist that day, so she literally left a message that said, hey, Sean, I'm not ignoring you. I'll call you back tomorrow morning. This gentleman's coming in that I can talk to, and we'll sit down and figure it out. And then the next morning, she called me back and she asked me a few questions, and I could tell that the guy was in the office. I don't know why he just didn't get on the phone, but he was in the office, and she was just kind of being the in-between, turning around and asking him the questions. And what it came down to was I was an idiot. I wasn't following the instructions, because they specifically said in this tool, you have to use a drill press and you have to use something like that clamp I showed you earlier. And I could not, for the longest time, figure out why, which is what I got so mad, because that is just a much slower method. I did try it, and it worked just fine. It took me about a week of just fuming over it, having put the whole project up when I was turning something else, and I was when I was working on something else, and I was using my card scraper, and I figured out the reason why everything kept blowing up. Because this is not a true scraper. Everyone knows that when we use a card scraper, what are we doing? We take our thumbs on it, we press it forward, we bend it, and we cant it forward a little bit so that the burr can bite, and we can take a nice shaving. Very easy to do. And the tools that are scrapers, like a cabinet scraper, what do? They also cant the blade forward a little bit so it will take a nice shaving. There we go. When we use a scraping tool on the lathe, what do? We present it at a slightly negative angle. So as the wood is hitting it, it's not hitting it at 90 degrees, it's hitting it at a slightly negative angle. And even carbide turning tools with the same kind of chicklets, what do they tell us to do? To engage slightly below center, thus creating that slightly negative angle. It's not hitting the wood at a true 90 degrees. Well, this tool is. It is actually machined so that the chiclet is actually bolted on at a true 90 degrees to that. So it's not got that negative rake that most scrapers do. Thus, all the force cutting the wood is actually going completely sideways, and it's acting more like a wedge than an edge. Thus, I was getting the wood splitting because I had nothing holding it together. Especially with this Texas ebony, which is kind of porous, it just split right off. So did all the oaks and all that kind of stuff. The ones that didn't so much were like the cherries that didn't have as much grain. They didn't split as easily. And that didn't make sense to me when I first started thinking about the scraping action, because all my other pen mills, well, they are kind of the same way. See, a complete 90 degrees for the cutting edge. And then I started thinking about how I've been sharpening these for years. I would always grind a little bit here, but then I would come back and you can see there's like a little shiny spot on that edge right there, because I would take my mill file and I would kind of just clean it up a stroke or two that way. Thus, I was creating a microscopic edge that was less than 90 degrees so that I could actually press into the wood, and it wasn't so much splitting action as a scraping action. And I think Woodpecker understood that one because I actually did read the instructions. I don't know why, because it was huge, big, and bold, but in there they flat out said you need to use a clamp like this in the drill press. Why? Well, the drill press with that lever has a lot more control down, so you can go smoothly. So this cadence that created that star pattern, because my pressure is not consistent, well, that would be eliminated. And the clamp itself would hold the wood together, so it wouldn't be as tendency to split on us. So this mechanism kind of alleviated the problems that they might have already had in testing. I can't verify that one, with having this straight edge. But there's easy solutions to the problem, so you might not have to do that. But I'm going to stick with doing this one. The two solutions I came up with is, A, they sell chiclets nowadays that have negative rake scrapers. I'm not sure they did when this was sent out to me. I don't know how long that's been around, but I just don't use carbide that often, so I don't stay up to date. But you can buy chiclets that have a little, like a 5-degree kind of bevel all the way around. The downside of those is you can't resharpen them on diamonds because you'd have to wear too much away. The other thing is, the more I thought about it, I think they could actually machine this kind of with a negative, and even more, they could machine it at a skew. So you'd have a negative rake skewed scraper for end grains, and that would get such a great finish. I did email them that idea, but I don't think they've done it. It might just be machining might be too much, because this kit really wasn't that much money when you look at it. But I'm going to get back at it, and we're going to use this thing the way it should be, in a drill press with a clamp. We'll finish this video. Now, I went on that little exposition because this video is about production woodworking, the development of process. And while wonder tools are out there, and they will be very, very good a lot of times, sometimes you have to follow the instructions, but you have to adapt your old techniques to take best advantage of them. This right here, while each individual one might take me a little bit longer than me just grabbing a blank and like that, because you're having to put it in the clamp, you're having to do all that kind of stuff, the fact that I don't have to sharpen it, well, that will still make me much, much quicker. And I also wanted you to understand that even after years of doing stuff, you come into obstacles, and a lot of times the solution is to step back to the basics. Once again, it took me till I was card scraping something weeks later to figure out why this was happening, and to come up with solutions that I could use with my old techniques if I wanted to, adding some kind of negative rake, either the new chiclets or sharpening it, because you can add a bevel just like you did with the steel ones if I work at it. But I'm just going to follow the instructions to be safe. So, let's get at it. Well, let's say it is kind of nice that this thing right here, it's got the triangle shank instead of a round shank. So it's going to grip easier. Now, something you need to watch out for, and I just did it on this is the first one I tried with this method, is I blew way past my brass. You can see on this side, I was looking for that shiny part. That's normally what I do, but it didn't shine up this way. Maybe it's the carbide doesn't polish as it cuts. So I just kept cutting until I realized that I'd gone past it. So this is now a little bit shorter. Now on these kits I'm using right now, that doesn't make that big a difference. If you're, a few millimeters too far past, it'll still work perfectly fine. Nobody will notice the difference. But on some kits, you just have to get it dead perfect. The other thing I remembered is when I first did this many years ago, I remember having problems clamping this down because it would never seem to be dead on perfect. Remember, I had that pencil line right there, and I hadn't learned that trick yet. But to solve that problem, I did what I did right here. At this point in time, I don't really worry about that that marker line. I just clamp it up and I leave it loose. This is more than has enough bulk, and your hand will prevent it from torquing. And then whenever I start it, you might notice because it's rotating, it just kind of feeds in, and you'll see me go back and forth a little bit. That's me clearing out any CA glue on the tip. And then it just works from there. So I can do this without ever turning my drill press off. Just watch for the brass. Something I just noticed. If your blanks are 3/4 of an inch, you need to watch out here. I just noticed this is wider than this right here. So if I have this so it's going to be going down farther than I have it in the stock, then I will be hitting this metal piece, which is steel, which will destroy those. So you need to make sure that this is higher then you're going down into get down to the brass. So just be careful of that. I'm going to lower my table down a little bit to accommodate that. So now I can put these in with about a finger's worth, which you'll notice that where the brass is on this example, it's maybe half my fingers thick down. So I just need to make sure that I got enough clearance so I don't damage the carbide on this metal. It's a lot smoother. I did notice a vibration caused this thing to pop out. It's got these flats right here, so I don't know why that happened. Now, normally I would just take these, I put them back, and I put them back on the skewer and keep them all organized. I'm not really worried about lining up those black marker lines at this point in time. I just want to make sure I keep these together. Hence, another thing I used to do all the time is when I knew I was going to an art market where I was allowed to do demonstrations, I would make about 100 up to this point, and I would just kind of tape them together with some blue tape. Now, I'm a huge advocate for demonstrating at art markets and stuff like that. Even if it's just me bringing a knife and a bunch of spoon blanks and sitting in back to keep quiet. But I've got to be doing some woodworking because it shows the audience that this requires skill and that I did the work, because you would not believe the amount of art markets where they say they are handcrafted, but you can tell that somebody went down to Mexico, bought a bunch of stuff and brought it up and is passing it off as their own. But here's the other unique things with demonstrating pins, because it takes me a minute or two from this stage to make a finished pin when I'm in production mode. So what I will be at the market making pins right in front of people using a friction polish, so I don't have to wait for the finishing. I can assemble it right there and there and hand it to them so that they can buy a pin that they watched being made. But I can also bring out some extra safety glasses, and I can ask them, hey, do you want to make a pin? And then all they're going to do is round out this, and I'll assemble it for them, and they will feel great about it. It'll take another 5 minutes, but it allows me to talk to the audience, because you're going to attract an audience when you're doing that. While they're demonstrating, you can build up value and stuff like that. And here's a funny thing. I would charge 20 bucks for a pin I'd make. I'd charge 25 bucks for a pin they would make. And you won't be making too many pins because you're going to be letting other people doing it. And it just builds up craft. It builds the hobby up, and that increases the value of what you have behind you, the more expensive stuff that you're actually trying to sell other than these impulse buys. So make 100 of these blanks. You might only make 20 pins. You might make 50 or 100 of them. You never know. If it's really slow, you will be making them most of the time because it makes use of your time. And there we go. They're organized, ready to rock and roll. So I'm just going to go through the rest of these. We'll come back and finish it up. Okay, truly, there is no rational reason for my disdain of turning pins. I mean, they've constantly been a reliable moneymaker for me. When I say I've sold thousands, it's probably been multiple of that. And it's generally extra money for me. And I can't even say that, I don't like the repetition or that kind of stuff because, I sell tops by the tens of thousands, and they are just as repetitious as this. But it's just something about it that's totally irrational that I just do not enjoy for some reason, which is why you just don't see me do it very often. Or I haven't. This particular time, well, it's been a year since I've been on this project, and I can make up excuses or what for not doing them. Things happened in life, and I wasn't going to be able to do too many markets in 2024, but I am getting back to them in 2025, so I should build up my inventory. But really, that's no excuse. I just didn't want to do the pins. But, this week I just said, I got to put my big boy pants back on and finish this video and make, the 40, 50 pins that are left after all the ones I blew up. But you've been watching this video for about an hour now, and I need to tell you, what you just saw, that's all the turning we're doing. Now, please remember, this is part of a kind of a series, this being the first one in the series, but it's based off of that intro to wood turning video series. And I did do a kind of an introduction to mandrel turning. I think I labeled that video, Turn Your First Pin. I'll put a link to it right there. So if you've never turned a pin, obviously this video isn't quite for you because we're doing batch production work of pins. But if you've turned, half dozen or 2 pins, well, you already know the techniques to make the pin. There's no reason for me to cover that again. Though, what you just saw me do was different because in that turning video series, I think all we used was one tool. That's all we are at that video series. In this one, I used a different tool. And I'm going to explain that this, if you're going to be batch producing, is one of those instances where it is worth your time to spend an hour or 2 and learn a new tool, or at least one cut with a new tool. And I am using a skew to make my pins in production mode for many reasons, not the least of which I get a better shape and I get a better finish, easier. So if you want to do my technique, or maybe you just want to go back to the way you knew how to do it, make 100 pins or something like that, see if you even enjoy the process, do it that way. It doesn't really matter the turning aspect. I'm going to show you how to do it with this and the reason why I do it like that, but you already know how to turn a pin. This is just working on process. And that's what I want to talk about next. Now, in my how to turn your first pin video, I use this mandrel, and I talked about it in the video. This is perfectly fine. It is really great for making pins. All of my pins up until this production run were actually made on this exact mandrel, though it's kind of like your grandfather's axe. I've gone through several of these, many of these, but it's always been kind of this setup right here. The only difference between this and this really cool woodpecker one that they sent me whenever I told them I was doing this video, I think they call it their pin mandrel system. I've been using this for about a year now, doing other mandrel turnings, and I flat out love it. The difference is, in order to squeeze things in between them, like we did in thing, you don't have to tighten up this knurled nut right there. And then you don't have to line up your end mill, your live center, and just kind of ruin that tip on the live center. What this does is basically you have one part that goes here, and you can slide on your bushings with your wood, and then this literally slides over the top of it, and you can squeeze down by twisting on your quill. Really has made things faster. That's why I like it. It just works. It's a simple design that just works, and you can make little 13-year-old boy rude comments about how it works. Anyways, they did not have this mandrel system back when I got started, so this past year, me using it was kind of a real eye-opening awakening that technology has progressed. This is super nice, and it is useful for a lot of different things, different shaped mandrels, because with the old one, you'd have to buy different kits like this for different stuff, otherwise load up with a whole bunch of those bushings to kind of space everything out. This one doesn't matter. It has a collet right here, and I can just move this back and forth to get whatever length I want. It works really, really well. Not too many new tools do I recommend, but I've been using this one for on and off for a year. It or one of its equivalents is something, yeah, I would definitely get if you're going to go into production work. Otherwise, the less expensive model will serve you just fine. You still make a pin. Anyways, here's how I got this set up. I have one bushing right here. This bushing never moves throughout the entire production run. I have two bushings over here. They, on this particular one, are the same size, but a lot of times they are different size. So I've gotten in the habit of being very critical of how I place them. I always place them in the exact order they came off. So I come over, I grab one of my pre-made blocks, which, in this video, I've had these for over a year and a half now. I determine which is the front and which is the back. The longer one is going to be the front. There's the front. So I look for my black line. You can see that right there. So that's going to go towards the center. So bring it on. Now I have found that sometimes they aren't quite reamed out well with that cleaned out kit. So sometimes I might have to ream it out a little bit with this tool right here, which is what a lot of people use to put the brass bushings into the pins. But this one should be okay. There's the other black line. I move it in. Whoops. I put the middle bushing in. I move that one in. I put the end bushing in. I bring my quill up, tighten the tailstock, tighten up the quill a little bit, lock it down. Everything's set. I don't worry about twisting these right now. I just know that they are in the correct order. This is always, always, always the front of my pens. This is always, always, always the back of my pen. That is because I've taken artistic decision out of the equation. I've turned it into a process, and that even includes order of operations with the actual turning and body mechanics. Now, normally, whenever I turn with a skew, I'm pretty much always using this 1-inch skew. Doesn't matter how big a project is or how small a project is, this one will do it. On the really big ones, I have a really big skew, but this is my go-to skew. It feels right in my hand. It feels very natural in my hand. The exception being on pens. On pens, I have a very specific shape I'm reproducing over and over and over. The peak of the crest is about a third of the way up on both the top and the bottom as it comes down in there. And then it kind of comes down the middle. You could think of it very much as a female shape, you know, your hips, legs, torso, or you could just think that it's really natural feeling. I know a lot of people like having a straight pen, but my thinking is this shape feels right in your hand when you're writing because of this angle. And I talked about that in your turn your first pen. This angle, if there's any variation in that straight line, you can feel it. This one, I can feel it a little bit, but it's not obtrusive. When you have a straight coming down to another straight, that is obtrusive and it actually hurts over time. This is comfortable because it's smooth. Your hand can move over it very easily. So I prioritize this angle right here coming through to that tip, which means that this has got to be a little bit wider. And then the way you hold it, most people's palms kind of fall right about there, so that curvature just works really, really well. I like this shape for those reasons. It functions well, it feels well. The ergonomics are right for me, my opinion. I used a 3/4 inch skew to make these for the simple reason this width is about a third the total length. So this tool becomes my sizing gauge. I always know that the crest of it's going to be right here diving towards the middle. Also the fact that the spindle roughing gouge, which I showed you all how to turn your very first pen with, and it's probably the easiest way to do it, it doesn't leave as smooth a finish as easily. A skew, making a planing cut, which we will get to in probably one of the next few series I do in the introduction to wood turning, well, its native motion is a nice, smooth, straight line or gentle curve. That's what it does best. And if you can get that, you don't have to spend as much time with sandpaper shaping it. So using that tool on this specific project with the skill levels that's very easy for somebody like you to develop, which I've developed over time, it might not be as fast for all the time. Some harder woods, it's actually slower. But because I save time in coming up with a consistent shape and I don't have to do as much sanding, overall it's faster. I just find it takes a lot of the thought out of my head so that I can get into a groove and just batch these things out, which is what we're doing right now. So here we go. Turn the lathe on, going forward, max out the speed. Okay, my objective right now is turn a straight cylinder across a little bit bigger than the middle bushing. So I just head after that and do that. now have a straight cylinder. Notice the distance I have right there in the middle above that little bushing. It is consistent from here to here. I don't have to think about anything there anymore. Now all I need to do is blend from about that point to the center, from about that point over to the center, and then blend it into those two bushings, and I will have that perfect shape I want. So I come over here, I have my gouge right there. I come back about halfway or 2/3, make my first cut over, blending it over. I come back a little bit more. There we go. Please notice I did not go all the way down to that bushing. It's maybe 1/10 of a millimeter. Yeah, no, not that big a deal. So I come back, I then come down over here and straighten this one out. Once again, I'm not going to be cutting the steel, I'm just getting really close. There we go, no big deal. Come back over, do the same exact thing here. Do the same exact thing here. Now, this particular blank, you're hearing a little bit of chatter because I'm looking at the camera and watching here, so my pressure is a little bit off. But notice I've got a little bit of chatter mark, but it's smooth curves coming over. So from here on out, I can just sand to the shape I want, getting it right up to that bushing very, very easily. Now the only curve I really focus on is this one right here. If I'm a little bit off here, no big deal. If I'm a little bit off here, no big deal. But that one right there has to be perfect. I should not feel any difference between the wood and that bushing when I'm done. So what I do is I reverse my lathe. You can see it's now turning this way, so the sawdust is going away from me right now. And I will turn it up to not quite, 1,000 or something like that. I don't even actually pay attention to speed. I just have a general feel right here. Now sanding wise, I generally start at 180. I'll go up 240, 320, and I finish at 400 for these production pen works. Obviously, if you're going down the artistic route, you're probably going to spend a lot more time going through many, many grits, especially if you have any kind of resin or epoxy in your mix right there. But I hate sanding. I don't want to spend a lot of time sanding, so that's why I do. Also, a little kind of inside baseball with y'all. Every time I bring out this little sanding pad, people will ask me, where'd you get it? Where'd you get it? I get these when I go to symposiums, when you have the little checkout. A lot of times, just over on the corner, they have them right there. Now, the guy that makes them, that I've always gotten them from, I generally buy like 2 or 3 a year when I go to symposiums, because they wear out. You can see this one's cracking up. He's not in very good health. He hasn't been coming to this very few symposium or so. I've been nursing this one along for 2 years now, and it's about ready to fall apart. With that in mind, if you haven't subscribed to my Instagram, you might want to, because I have something coming out that's going to be a lot better than what I'm using right here, and it won't degrade over time. Hint, hint, hint. So you could buy one once and keep it for decades versus this one that tends to fall apart and actually melt. So I'll be making commercial here for my videos for it. It's probably going to be my big product of 2025. Hopefully, I'm working with somebody right now, but it'll probably be first announced on Instagram. Just a little behind the scenes stuff. Anyways, so here's my sanding regimen. Also, people understand that normally this shop is really, really loud because not only do I have fans blowing sawdust away from me at all times, I also have 2 dust collectors at the attic going. I actually had to wear headphones whenever I turn because of all the dust collecting mechanisms that go out. But for this video, I can't do that one. So my main focus is right here. So what I would do is, once again, it's turning this way, fairly slow RPM. I come over and I just focus on this, going in circles, or you can go sideways, but do not stop. And I work here with my coarsest grit until that is smooth. And then this is about as much time as I spend on the rest of it. Okay, that's my 180. 240. 320, 400. On the 400, I will stop the lathe. I will reverse the direction towards me. I will start it up again, and I would do the same exact thing, going in reverse. And I'll spend probably a little bit more time on this grit with 400 than I do the others. There we go. Then I will turn it off. I will manually go with the grain. Wipe it down of the sawdust, and there we go. I'm now done with my sanding. I'm ready for finish. My process for finish, this is exactly the same as when I did on the Turn Your First pen, except I don't have an oil step. It just takes too long to dry when I'm doing production runs, so I put a little bit of friction polish on it. I turn the speed way down, make sure it's going away from me, and then I just lay it on wet. Work it back and forth until it gets a tad bit tacky, which only takes about 10-15 seconds. It's getting a tad bit tacky now. That's basically the wax is gone, the shellac has been absorbed, and now we're just kind of doing the wax, which is why it gets tacky. Then I will max out my speed, again going away from me. I like these little cloth little doodads I do. I put a rubber band on the back and it's just folded over several times. I'll use the same one for probably thousands of pens. I just lost it, so I just made this one today. And notice when I hold it, I don't grip it. If it gets ripped out of my hand, it's just gonna slide out. It's no big deal. And I also don't wrap it around. I just have a finger on top. It goes right here, and I just put in some heat. And this will melt the wax into the wood, and it cures the shellac somewhat. I then flip it over to a dry side and put in some more heat with dry, and that removes all tackiness. I'm done with finishing, okay? Again, I'm going for production, fast work to make an impulse buy. That is good enough. Now, if you want to sell the ad, you can tell people it's an oil shellac wax finish so that your natural body hand oils will absorb into it, and this finish will look better the more you use it, much like a piece of leather or something like that. It gets an aged, well-worn look that polishes up really great. Now, if you do want it to shine a little bit after you've used it for the first 2-3 months, you can just take it to a cotton cloth and rebuff up the wax, and it'll shine up a little bit. But really, after about a year's use, it's going to be really shiny just from your use and abrasion of your fingertips. Now, I want you to think back to how this work surface looked when we first started, okay? Because we're going to get it back to that original setting. Loosen up the quill, loosen it up, twist it right here, bang that off, back this back. That gives you a nice clear section right here. The first bushing comes off and you place it exactly in the same spot every time you do this. This is the top of the pen, this is the bottom of the pen, every single time. So I know that this is where the clip's going to be. So I take this off. All that will stay there. I place it down in order. I come over, I grab my top clip section. This time I'm going to go gold. I come over, I place it in, I bring it down, I put the tip on, and I lock it down. Always hold it close to that joint. Boom, there we go. So now I can twist this off. The screw portion was put in there. Grab my clip. I personally like to leave these plastic pieces on all the way to the point to right when I sell them, because it kind of shows the customers this is a brand new pen. And there we go, twist it on. Now if you remember when I turn this, also when you twist it on, that plastic piece doesn't leave a line going around your pen. If you remember when I turned this, I said that this top portion isn't that critical. But notice that the curve right here, even if you miss it a little bit, It just flows over. And this portion of the pen, people very rarely kind of touch it like I'm doing right now. They don't rub back and forth on it like they do the other side. But right now, I'm now done with the top of the pen. Set it down. I come back, grab this middle section, bring it, place it in the same exact spot. That's the one end, that's the middle. Now bring it over and I keep it in order. I will come over, I'll grab whatever chrome or gold. I'm doing gold right now. It comes in here. I just place it lightly. It goes in. Kind of working around the camera right now. And once again, holding it here to maintain it, I lock that down. Now, I do not release this from here. I bring it back, I flip my two other cases because I'm going to put the transmission on without removing it. This is one of those things that you're kind of reducing your steps. So I place the transmission in, I come back over, bring that up, holding it in the center. This is the most critical one. This is the one that you will screw it the most often when squeezing it. That's why it's important to hold it so you add stabilization and bring it in. Now notice I'm going to bring it not all the way to that chrome dent right there. That's where it's supposed to go. I'll bring it down to the bottom of the brass. I should be holding it, but I'm not for the camera. This is because our next step is to set the depth of the ink. So I come back over. This normally takes me 3 tries on purpose. So I will put the ink in, I will fully screw it down, and then I will move the transmission into its open position, and I will look at where it is here. I just want to protrude the right amount, about 2 millimeters or so like that. You kind of get a feel for it. So I can see how far I need to progress it. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to try to get just short of that because you can't push it back in without destroying the pen. So I know how much it needs to progress down, so I will, holding it here, you feel this. My eyesight, I can't really see a difference in the chrome, but I can kind of feel how far I've pushed it in. So I'm going to go a little bit past that chrome line, then come back. Remember, I'm trying to get it a little bit short, and if I overshot that, I got it just right. To me, that is just about right. Can we see that? That distance apart from the end? Could probably go a little bit more, but the customer won't have any problems with that amount of protrusion. So recessed, pulled out. It's got a little brass cap on the tip that you can't see. There we go. So from here, just grab the center section. Then retract your pen, line up your grain, and press it together. And there we go. A nice custom pen. Put on the strap, grab another one, and repeat the process. And that's that. It's just back to the beginning, and you do it over and over and over. And I am typically listening to some kind of podcast. Find the long one, find my black line, slide it on, middle bushing, find the black line, slide it on, end bushing, bring it up, lock it down, tighten it up, crank your speed, right direction, and get after it. Now, in production ones, I do want to mention that if you're batching out stuff like this, you also need to think about how to transport it and how to display it. And I've tried different things in the past. I actually ended up building me a small cabinet that's the best way I've done these pens. Because I'll show you the cabinet I've got hanging on my wall right here just because I haven't worked a market since COVID. But I will be in 2025. We're building up the inventory. This right here was my pen display cabinet. I will build a new one for my new booth that I'm designing. I did not have this door on here. I put that on about a year ago. But basically, this is how I had it set up. I would put very nice pens up top, you know, stuff, the artistic styles. Then I would have a medium collection right here. And then either in bowls or low jars, I would put maybe 100 different variations of that $20 pen. That was priced 4 years ago. Whenever I packed it up, all I had to do was put a towel here and a towel here, and all the inexpensive pens I just dropped in here. And then this would lay flat in a box. So this one display handled protection during transportation, and it was a display. And a lot of times I would just put it right on the table. Sometimes I would actually mount it from my tent if I had the tall section, because I could put a little dovetail cleat on it and just hang it right there. And it worked out great for 7 or 8 years. I used this as my pen display. I also sometimes did other stuff like small boxes or whatever, but little things worked right there that weren't my big high dollar sellers. Well, I truly hope you enjoyed that, and those of y'all that are kind of motivated into turning woodworking into, you know, a little side hustle or something like that, you got some good tips over there. I really, truly believe that when you're doing production work, it comes down to reducing your decisions and turning artistic decisions into process. Y'all be safe, have fun, and remember, it's always worth the effort to learn, create stuff, and share it with others, especially if they're giving you $20 or so.